So when I ask UX people who practice user research, what is their biggest challenge? I usually hear how hard it is to engage stakeholders with research. What are your thoughts on the topic?
I hear this too as an independent consultant quite a lot, and often the symptoms of this are that I hear about are that they're not engaged, they're too busy, they don't think it's important. But I do also hear from successful teams that the stakeholders are really engaged and they think it's really important, and the differences between them come down to, in my experience, the culture and values of the company, and where teams and stakeholders are rewarded. So I worked with this neat company in South Carolina that was transitioning from making software and web apps that were just incredibly feature rich, and their whole way of working was to go out and talk to their users and come back with requirements, and they would put in whatever the users asked for. And stakeholders thought that this was really great until it just got out of control, first of all, because there was no way to design those things in. So they found out very quickly over the last few years, even though the company had been in business for 25 years before that, 30 years before that, that their support costs were going way up because people couldn't find the features that they were looking for. And even though part of the offerings of each of the products was training, the people who were actually using the software and the web apps were not getting the training. So suddenly, seeing the bottom line change, not for the better, got the stakeholders interested in what the user experience was like. And this created a kind of a cultural cascade of creating a pilot project and moving on from there to what are we going to do and how are we going to do it and how do we propagate this through the company. So when I hear UX people say, I can't get any attention from stakeholders, I think in general we're not very good about talking about business and connecting design to business, and then connecting those things to what the reality of the experience of using whatever the product or the design or the service is, and how that affects the bottom line, or the stock price, or whatever the coverage is in the business news. A few companies have started to look at this, but by and large, with the stakeholders, if by stakeholders we're talking about management,
we're talking about management, we're talking about product managers, software engineers, sometimes designers.
Yeah, if you're talking about product managers and people on the management side, they're pretty driven by what revenue looks like and what profit looks like, because that's how they're measured and rewarded. And that's probably true for some designers in some companies as well. Especially if design is something that is valued as a kind of a packaging more than driving an experience.
How do you deal with people who do not respect UX research processes? You know these people.
How do you deal with people who don't respect UX research processes?
To them you're just a data point. They can either listen to you or not. They laugh at the numbers of people you talk with.
Yeah. There are a couple of ways. One is to tell stories of other possibly competitive organizations that did pay attention and became successful, maybe even outpacing the people I'm talking with. But modeling has always worked really well for me, and that usually means getting people to either role play in kind of a safe, limited situation, or come with me to observe sessions. There's always this aha moment when you can get people to do that. And if I can set up a situation where it's low cost to the person who's being resistant about it, so they can see what it's like, what I'm actually doing when I'm doing research, as opposed to just getting a report and seeing the data objectified, seeing the user objectified, that tends to work really well for me, giving them the experience of observing real people using their stuff.
All right. Imagine an in-house UX researcher who's always trying to identify opportunities for impactful research. What would you recommend they do to better identify such opportunities?
It's all about networking. You know, making yourself known within the organization, and letting people know that you are there, that you have these skills that can help them, that even if you're not available to do all the research that they might need or want, that you can help them do it, that you're there as an advisor, as a coach, as a resource, and that you know stuff that you could, just answer questions if they get stuck in a design decision.
UX researchers sometimes experience a tension between conducting research they were asked to do by their stakeholders versus research they were not asked to do but think they should do. What are your thoughts on balancing this tension?
I think there are ways to elegantly finesse that in any given study, and probably over time, where you can make sure that the person paying for the project, or the project paying for the project, gets what they need, but that you can fit in kind of your agenda as well, as long as it works in the research design. I've encountered this a few times where, say, a market research group was funding a research project that I was working on. So they're very marketing oriented, and they want to hear about the message and about how people feel about a design. But the R&D people who had originally brought me in wanted to know much more about how the interaction was happening, and they had one particular thing that they wanted me to work on to clear up some disagreement within the group about how to implement some feature. So it worked that we could negotiate a settlement there where both agendas could be served. And I found, at least in that case, it worked great because they would actually talk to each other and agree. But there have been a few other situations where we've had to sort of do it in a kind of stealth way. What I tell practitioners is do whatever you can do to make yourself smarter and help your teams make better design decisions. And depending on how much scrutiny you're under about how the thing is designed and how engaged the stakeholders are, you have a lot of leeway with what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. Often I will do the project that I was asked to do, but ask my stakeholders from that project to invite others who might find something useful from being present. And that often ends up being a fruitful thing in a lot of ways, because I get to ask questions that I would like to ask. And now two groups are talking to each other about a thing that they may never even have realized they were both working on before.
What about people, when I collected some information for the book, people told me you should discuss things such as people who can't even start. Their stakeholders don't even let them. They don't fund anything. They just block almost everything they try to do.
I get this question all the time.
What do you tell people?
Just go do it. Do it on your lunch hour, or if you're going out for coffee in the afternoon or whatever, make that an opportunity to do user research. Pay for it out of your own pocket if you need to. But you can do it so cheaply now. And this happens to me even now. There are projects here and there where there's no funding. And there's no time. But I'm being asked for my expertise. I don't feel confident in just going by conventions for a lot of applications because it might not work the way I think it works. So, I will call up a friend on Skype and say, somebody who's an appropriate user, and say, will you try this thing for me? And I can watch them do that. It took, 15 minutes or a half an hour or whatever. And I got enough data to go to the person who asked me to say, these really interesting things happen when I got time with somebody who is a real user. I think we should follow up on this. So you can do the stealth thing and use that as evidence for doing more that may or may not be funded.
I once invited the entire executive management to be participants in the first usability test.
Yeah. Oh, I've done that too. Bring in,
completely.
Yeah, make the stakeholders the participants in the study. Yeah, I did that once at a big server company, and it was really interesting seeing those guys in the chair instead of in the observation room. It was a big revelation. So that was very brave of you.
Yeah. They appointed me product manager after that, so that didn't work so well. But
was that punishment or reward?
No, they said, okay, we get it. Now you'll be the leader.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's great.
So many practitioners are always looking for creative deliverables that engage their stakeholders with research findings. What are some deliverables you found to be working well for you and your clients?
I actually don't believe in reports, so I don't find them useful for a lot of reasons. Usually they come along way too late after the fact. The team really, if you can get a team engaged in observing users, they want to act immediately. And so what I like to do is get them to collaborate with me on identifying insights as the research is going on. This, I found, even with resistant stakeholders, really works well because they get to say right away, I saw this, this, and this, and contribute to that discussion. Also, it's great because if there's stakeholders in the room from different parts of the organization, business, technical, marketing, they're all seeing this truth from their different angles, and they can begin immediately talking about the constraints and the direction for where the design is failing and where it could be improved. This generates a lot of energy. So it's something that I call a rolling issues list, and we just keep doing this as the sessions go on, add to it and refine the wording of each of the issues, and that ends up being the report, which is also awesome because at the end of each day of research you can just send this out as an email or put it on a wiki or put it on the intranet, and you have an instant report, an instant deliverable that virtually anybody can understand because it's bullet points with numbers of incidents. So I do that, and I found that to be very successful. I also like to finish a round of research with a KJ activity. Jared may have mentioned this, but I just find it really energizing and powerful for everybody who observed to get a chance to vote on their thing with a complete democratic leveling. You know, so the CEO can be in the room, and the guy who's running the QA testing can be in the room, and they get the same number of votes, and as a group come out with a priority list that now everybody can focus on. What's really interesting about the KJs that I've run for like the last year is that while we've been collecting like usability problems throughout a usability test or through a field study, often what comes out in the KJ are much bigger issues. You know, they're not cosmetic usability bug fixes. They're like, the marketing bundle is all wrong. You know, we've modeled this completely off because we've been working in a vacuum. And I love when that happens, because I feel like I've earned my money then.
In many cases, you find, you know, that there are bigger problems.
Yeah, exactly. That those little insights from observing people using a design in a lab or in a context really reveal a much bigger problem or a much bigger mindset within the organization about something they've projected out that just doesn't work, doesn't translate to real life. But I try not to write reports. There are a few occasions when I'm required to do that, and I tend to keep them minimal. I also, except for special circumstances, tend not to do highlights videos, because I feel they're manipulative.
You can be, yeah.
You can be. And it's very difficult to be ethical, especially if it feels like there's a lot of work to do on a UI or on a design, to lean it in one direction or another. Not necessarily representing the data properly. So, but every now and then there's a write-up of a report, and so I still like to do the KJ, because then I can focus on the top 5 things that everybody really cares about and that things are going to be done about. And that also means that I can do a deep dive on the data that's related to those top priority things, instead of doing this, you know, scattershot 100-page report that covers everything that we had originally scheduled to investigate, but that is not really going to get very much attention. So,
all right. Last question. What's your take on letting stakeholders moderate sessions?
Oh, I think it's a brilliant idea, because it's really hard to do it very well. And I've done this a couple of times. So the way I've tried to work it is I do a couple of sessions. I give them a briefing, because I'm not going to get them to go through any sort of training or anything. And the briefing comes down to some very simple do's and don'ts. And those are mostly about ask open-ended questions, don't offer anything, because the participant will say yes, and be careful about recasting what you think somebody has said. Try to use their same words back if you're trying to get more information. But yeah, I think it's a worthwhile thing. But then my position too is that everybody in an organization should be able to go do user research. I don't think it should be contained to one little pocket of practitioners who own that little silo. Because I don't think it's good for design. I don't think it's good for teams to basically outsource that within the company. So getting product managers and other kinds of stakeholders to go to moderate sessions, I think is a very good thing for them to try and practice. And not everybody's going to be good at it. You know, people don't. When somebody asks you when you're 5 years old, no kid says, "I want to grow up to moderate usability tests," right? But it's something that you can learn to do, and some people are going to be good at it, some people are not. But having managers, having stakeholders do it, I think is good practice for them to get with users. It's good for the team to see the manager be in a position where they're getting feedback directly. And I think it could help managers be more empathetic with what a research practitioner does every day, all day long. So, also I think even if they do a crappy job, they should be allowed to do it, because it's more than I could do, you know, because I don't have enough hours in the day to do all the research there is in any given organization. So at least they're with the users.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.